Alrighty, so I watched Binger's closing argument today. I did not, I've not as of yet watched, what's his name, Richards. And I have to say, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm echoing the sentiments of the panel on Nick Rekieta's stream, but before, while I was watching it, I was having a lot of the same reaction before I heard all of them sum up their thoughts. So, with that out of the way, I do pretty much agree with everyone else that Binger did start out pretty well. I mean, it's hard because I know that what he's saying factually is so dishonest, but the way that he was doing it was not so bad. His presentation was pretty good. He was pretty smooth in how he was talking. I thought he did a very good job managing the PowerPoint. I guess some folks on the panel are not fond of PowerPoints. I don't mind PowerPoints at all. I think they can be quite effective if you know how to use them. I think the reason why some people hate PowerPoints is because you have these Gen Xers, not even boomers, who get up there and write an essay on a slide and then read off the slide. You don't use a PowerPoint that way. PowerPoint is there for a few bullet points that are not a lot of words. They have to be real big and it has to be short little statements that you want your audience to see while you're talking, so that it's not just your words that they're hearing. If you have people who kind of are engaged both visually and aurally, A-U-R-A-L, is that the correct term? Maybe it's auditorily. Either way, people who are engaged through speech and people who are engaged through reading text. That's the use of a PowerPoint, is so that and the same thing also with using videos. That's another way of trying to engage someone with the information that you're trying to present. So I thought that Binger did a good job. Now, the transitions between the videos and the PowerPoint was pretty rough, but still, he's hitting all three of those different forms of communication. He's getting people text, he's getting people video, and he's speaking directly to them. And so with that sort of presentation going well, you have to still have some kind of underlying narrative. And that is where Binger fell apart the further he got into his closing arguments. Early on, when he first started, it was pretty effective. Kyle Rittenhouse is a murderer. We all know it. Just look at this. Look, he shot somebody. There, bam, case closed. And the problem was he kept going on and on and on. And yes, none of what he said for the most part was very honest or true or truthful. A lot of it wasn't even factual. But you can get away with that if he had kept it to, I think, an hour, 45 minutes. Right around there, I think Binger would have had a fantastic closing argument. But when he drags on for, I don't know exactly how long it was, but it was it was over 2 hours. It was maybe 2.5 hours. I got to the point where I wasn't totally tuning him out. I did listen to the whole thing, but I started, pausing and going to look at some other stuff on my phone and then coming back to it. I mean, it was hard to get through in one sitting and just listen to everything he had to say. And after a while, I really didn't know where he was going with it. I didn't know I had lost focus of what his overarching point was. And you shouldn't let your audience do that if you're trying to give a presentation. It should be clear, what your overarching narrative is, the whole time. And if, it seems your audience feels like you're straying off a little bit, you got to bring it back. You have to tie in what you were talking about back into the overarching narrative, or else, whatever you were saying for that period of time was just a waste of time, and you were tiring people out and boring them. And there were, a lot of things that I noticed, little things in Binger's presentation where he logically contradicted himself. Things that he said at one point were not true. He then said later, matter-of-factly, when he was talking about how, nobody ever asked Kyle to come protect CarSource. That was totally made up. The CarSource guys never heard of him. They don't know who he is. Nobody wanted him to be there. And then later on, Binger's talking about, well, the agreement was Kyle would stay with the group at 59th Street, and there were other people protecting 63rd Street. And it's like, wait, Binger, was Kyle like a part of a group? Was he asked to be there? Was there coordination here? Or was Kyle just some rogue actor who showed up telling everyone, hey, I'm here to protect you? And little stuff like that I don't think matters too much to a jury. I don't think the jurors are that engaged. Now, who knows? Maybe we have people on this jury who are, particularly interested in the case. But generally speaking, I mean, a jury of your peers is going to be a jury of average people who are generally, they're not that bright. I don't have a lot of respect for the average person when it comes to, something like this. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I just mean, by this point, you've been sitting on this jury for over 2 weeks. You probably want to go home. It was a long day of trial, even before we got to Binger's closing argument, let alone Richard's closing argument. I have to watch that after I'm done recording this, and I don't expect that to be very fun. It's just, these people, they've made up their minds. I don't think there are people sitting on the fence. I think probably 70% of them made up their minds before the trial even started. Probably another, well, I shouldn't say that. Let's say 50% were totally made up their minds before the trial started. Another 25% probably made up their minds after the opening statements. And then let's say the other 15% were somewhat persuadable throughout the trial. But by this point, I mean, how do you sit through this stuff for 2 weeks and you don't have an opinion? These people have an opinion. And making people just sit through a closing argument that they don't really care about, it's just torture. I mean, it just kind of leaves people with a bad taste in their mouth about the prosecution. So I don't know why you would do that. I mean, if I were Binger, I would try and keep it short and sweet. Kyle lied and 2 people died. Make it something catchy like that. Come up with a slogan like Bush lied, babies died. Fauci lied, millions died. If the glove don't fit, then you must acquit. Just come up with something pithy like that. And, Binger just didn't do that. Now, of course, Richards didn't either. I mean, Richards is much worse than Binger. I found when Binger talks, it's much more interesting and listenable, if that's the right term, consumable, viewable, than when Richards is up, either whether he's doing direct or cross or whatever. He's just terrible. And, I mean, the only thing worse, perhaps, well, no, I shouldn't say that. The second worst thing, after Richards talking, is Richards sitting down with his legs crossed in his belly, which isn't, he acts like he's a real fat guy. He's not that fat. He's not really fat at all. But the way he wears his weight, he just is like somebody who maybe at some point was morbidly obese, like Krause. And he's just, he's always sitting there in the background, at his chair, looking very, very unattractive. And this might sound superficial to all of you. Hey, what does this have to do with the law? What does this have to do with self-defense? Absolutely nothing. But this is the kind of stuff that people think about a lot more when they're sitting on a jury than the actual law. You can sit on a jury and ignore the law. You can't sit on a jury and ignore how annoying Mark Richards's speech pattern is. You can't ignore how unattractive he is when he's sitting in a chair. You can't ignore how, rambly and directionless Binger's closing arguments were. These are the things you can't ignore if you're on a jury. But can you ignore Kyle Rittenhouse's right to self-defense? Can you just pretend like that doesn't exist and say, I don't like the kid, or I think his lawyer is annoying, so I'm going to convict him? Yeah, you can do that. And that's why Kyle probably won't be acquitted fully. But something that was huge today, before closing argument started, for the defense was that in jury instructions at the end, the judge kind of felt like, hey, these jury instructions are really long and confusing. Let me try and sum it up. Let's do a TLDR for the jurors. And what he said was pretty much, hey, if you find that, in either given case, whether you're talking about, or any of the three cases of Kyle shooting people, whether it's Rosenbaum, Grosskreutz, or Huber, if you find that Kyle, acted lawfully in self-defense on any of the charges, you don't have to even think about the lesser includeds. Because if it was self-defense, none of the lesser includeds apply. And that's good because, in whatever the highest thing that they charged him with, I don't know if it was like first-degree murder or it probably wasn't that. I'm sure it was second-degree. First-degree would be absurd. But whatever the highest charge was on any one of these given guys, they would charge him with lower crimes. That, let's say the jury couldn't convict him on second-degree homicide. They could convict him of assault with a deadly weapon, maybe. I don't know if that was actually a lesser included. I didn't check. I'm just using that as an example. But the judge's point is, if you're saying that he's not guilty of second-degree homicide because he lawfully acted in self-defense, well, then he's not guilty of assault with a deadly weapon either. You can't compromise and convict him of one of those lesser included. You just have to acquit on all accounts. And being told that directly by the judge, it's something that doesn't help the prosecution. And of course, I don't know if I mentioned it yet, but the first thing that happened today of note was the gun charge was thrown out, which is great, because Kyle obviously was in legal possession of a firearm. Minors are allowed to possess guns, and if you happen to be attacked and you're a minor, you still have the right to defend yourself. If your dad decides to beat you, you have the right to defend yourself. And I mean, it was ridiculous, the grounds that the prosecution was trying to use to even bring the gun charge, because they were saying, well, it could have been an SBR. It's like, well, wait, what do you mean it was an SBR? Did you measure the barrel of the gun? And Krauss was like, well, no, but I mean, the defense never said, never presented any evidence that it wasn't an SBR, as if the burden of proof is on the defense. Like, and a judge knows that's not how the law works. And I mean, the judge even said, do we have the gun here, like in court, as evidence? And it's like, oh yeah, it's right here. And everybody, you could look at that if you've ever seen an AR before. You know the difference between an SBR and a regular 16-inch barreled AR. They look very different. It's not like you're going to have a 15-inch barreled AR. Nobody would go through the trouble of, a tax stamp and an NFA item with a 15-inch barrel. It would go down to like an 11.5-inch barrel. And Kyle's gun clearly was a normal 16-inch AR. So all in all, up to the point where Richard's beginning to give his closing arguments, which I don't anticipate will go well, it is not a bad day for the defense. The prosecution did by no means hit it out of the park with their closing today. But again, I don't think it matters all that much. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow. Hopefully we have a verdict. But probably not. A verdict probably won't be around till Wednesday, I wouldn't think. But who knows? If this is a really bad jury, I mean, we could get something, Chauvin style, to where they just within 2 hours come back and say, yep, guilty on all counts. Fry his ass. But I would be very surprised to see guilty on all counts here. We can hope for an acquittal. Hope, but realistically, we're still probably looking at a mistrial, which means, well, who knows? Would they really bring this again? I mean, this was such a bad case. I mean, you would think that maybe Binger's too embarrassed to bring this case again if there is a mistrial. But who knows? I mean, certainly the media will have a field day if it's a mistrial. And I mean mistrial because of a hung jury. The media will, go, oh, well, see, he wasn't acquitted, so therefore he's guilty. It was a mostly white jury. Oh, it was It was a lone white supremacist on the jury who didn't want to convict Kyle, who saved him. I mean, the headlines already write themselves. And so, you know what? I guess I'm somewhat at peace. Now that the gun charge is gone and that the judge gave those instructions on the lesser included, so like, hey, if it was self-defense, you can't convict him of one of these lower charges because self-defense is an excuse to those charges too. And so I feel a little bit at ease after today. But who knows? Maybe now when I go and I listen to Richard's closing arguments, I will be totally black-pilled and go into tomorrow thinking, oh my God, he blew everything. But I have to remember at this point, it doesn't matter a whole lot what Richards does, one way or the other. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.